I had always imagined my son's wedding day would be one of the proudest moments of my life. I pictured straightening his tie, pinning the boutonniere on his lapel, and seeing him give me that boyish smile before he walked down the aisle. But instead, I was standing outside the Grand Hotel ballroom, clutching a gift wrapped in gold paper, when Michael himself appeared at the door, in his tuxedo, and said, "Mom, I'm sorry, but you can't come in." At first, I thought he was joking. We'd spoken just last week. I'd raised him alone after his father passed, worked double shifts as a nurse, skipped vacations so he could have every opportunity in life. And now, on the most important day of his, he was shutting me out. Behind him, I could see the guests laughing, champagne glasses clinking, the kind of joy I thought I'd share with him. Instead, the only thing I felt was the cold marble floor beneath my feet and a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply turned, walked away, and left the gift on the concierge's desk, because I already knew something he didn't, and soon the truth would tear his perfect day apart. People see a moment like that, a mother being told to leave her own son's wedding, and they think that must be the breaking point. They imagine that's when the world shatters. But the truth? The breaking point rarely comes in a single blow. It's the last splinter after years of tiny cracks forming in silence. Michael was my only child, the center of my universe. His father, John, died when Michael was just 8 years old. I can still feel that night in my bones, the knock at the door that made the air go still, the solemn eyes of the police officer on my porch, the cold metal taste in my mouth as the words, "accident," didn't make it tumbled into the quiet. And then Michael's small arms wrapping around me, his whole body trembling, as if I could somehow hold back the darkness trying to take him. That night, I made a silent vow. I would be both mother and father to him. So I did what I had to do. I picked up extra night shifts at the hospital, typing medical charts until my eyes burned. I brewed cheap coffee to stay awake, my hands smelling faintly of disinfectant for years. In the mornings, I'd still be the one packing his lunches. Peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally, an apple, a note folded in half telling him I loved him. I sat in the front row of every school play, clapping until my palms ached. When money ran short, I sold my wedding ring to pay for his college application. The little 2-bedroom house we lived in wasn't much, but it was ours, bought inch by inch, mortgage payment by mortgage payment, over decades. When Michael got into law school, I thought every sacrifice had been worth it. I doubled my hours again, skipped meals without telling him, and quietly juggled overdue bills just to cover his tuition. I put off fixing the leaking roof for 2 whole winters, telling myself I'd manage. Every graduation photo, every certificate he earned, I framed it and hung it in the living room, like pieces of my own soul displayed for the world to see. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. He came home less and less. Holidays that used to be loud and warm turned into polite, brief phone calls. His voice on the other end of the line lost that easy warmth. It became clipped, distracted, like he was halfway out the door even when we were speaking. Then he met Shannon, the woman who would become his fiancée. I wanted to like her. God knows I tried. I bought her flowers the first time she came over. I invited her to dinner, even used my late husband's family cookbook to make his favorite roast, a recipe I'd guarded for years. I told her stories about Michael as a little boy, hoping to make her feel included. But Shannon had a way of speaking over me, cutting me off mid-sentence with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She made jokes, little barbs wrapped in sugar, about how Michael needed to cut the cord and live his own life. And every time Michael would laugh, he'd glance at her the way a man looks at someone he's already decided will be the center of his universe, no matter who else gets pushed out. I told myself it was just new relationship growing pains, that every family had awkward transitions, but deep down, a quiet, unshakable voice was whispering, "You're losing him." Then came the first true warning sign, a letter from the bank, a notice for an account I'd never seen before, with Michael's name on it. I turned it over in my hands, that cold knot tightening in my stomach. When I asked him about it, his answer was quick, almost rehearsed. Just for wedding expenses. Mom. Then he changed the subject. I let it go. That's what mothers do. We let things slide. We give the benefit of the doubt, even when it stings. But mothers also remember. We notice patterns. And as the wedding date crept closer, I began to see enough to know that the growing distance between us wasn't just the natural course of life. It wasn't an accident. It was being built, piece by piece, wall by wall, by someone who wanted me on the outside. And whether Michael knew it or not, Shannon was holding the blueprint. By the time Michael got engaged, my life looked peaceful from the outside, but quiet doesn't mean small. I'd retired early from nursing after 30 years of double shifts and midnight calls. My pension, careful savings, and a modest inheritance from my aunt had left me financially secure. The same little two-story where I'd raised Michael was completely paid off. The sedan in my driveway wasn't flashy, but it ran smooth, and it was mine. Best of all, I had no debt, not a single dollar. People at church sometimes called me lucky, but I knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. Every dime was scraped together, every decision weighed. I learned long ago that security is the most valuable thing a single mother can have, because no one can take it from you, unless you let them. In the years before Michael's engagement, I'd grown that security. I invested part of my savings into a small rental property, just a humble duplex at the edge of town. Nothing glamorous, but it brought in steady income every month. I also built a healthy emergency fund, enough to live comfortably for years without touching my retirement. I never flaunted any of this. Even Michael didn't know the full picture. Not because I didn't trust him, at least I thought I did, but because I believed it was smarter to keep certain details private, especially when it came to money. That's why the first time Shannon came over, I didn't think much of her casual questions. How much is a house like this worth now? Do you ever think about downsizing? Must be nice, not worrying about a mortgage anymore. Her tone was light, almost playful, but there was something about the way her eyes lingered on the framed deed in my hallway, or how she seemed to be mentally cataloging my furniture. I brushed it off until the comments started stacking up. Little things like, "Michael's lucky you're so set for the future," or "It must be nice to have all that equity just sitting there." Always with that sugar-sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then came the slip that made my stomach tighten. One evening after service, a friend from church pulled me aside and said she'd overheard Shannon telling someone, "Michael won't have to worry about money once we're married." I remember standing there in the parking lot, holding my purse a little tighter, the cool night air suddenly feeling heavy. How would she know that? Why would she even say it? It wasn't just the words, it was the certainty in them, as if she already considered my security part of her future. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone, not yet, but I would prepare. I quietly reviewed every financial account, every property deed, every legal document with my name on it. I checked beneficiaries, updated passwords, and locked away anything important. I wasn't looking for trouble, but if trouble came, I wanted to be ready. And as I organized those papers at my kitchen table, one thought kept circling in my mind, a thought I couldn't shake. Maybe trouble was already here. 2 weeks before the wedding, Michael's name lit up my phone for the first time in over a month. His voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in years, too smooth, too deliberate, like an actor easing into a part he'd rehearsed. "Hey, Mom," he began, drawing out the word just enough to sound affectionate. "Shannon and I were thinking, maybe you could help us out with some last-minute wedding costs." I reminded him I'd already given them a generous check toward the reception months earlier, more than I'd spent on my own wedding, but he brushed it aside as though it were a token gesture. "Yeah, but you know how things add up," he said lightly. "Flowers, photography, the honeymoon?" His tone softened, almost coaxing, before he slid in the real request. "We were also wondering if we could use the house as collateral for a short-term loan, just until we get settled." It was as if a bright cold light had flicked on in my mind, illuminating every shadow. The bank notice in the mail, Shannon's curious questions about my will, her syrupy comments about how comfortable my life must be. One by one, they stopped being harmless quirks and formed a clear, deliberate pattern. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a plan. I kept my voice steady. "Michael, why would you need my house for that? You both have jobs." He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "It's just easier," he said finally. "Shannon's uncle works in finance. He can arrange everything. You wouldn't even have to do a thing." And then I heard her, muffled, in the background, but unmistakable. "Just tell her it's temporary." Something inside me hardened. It wasn't the request itself that struck me. It was the casual certainty, the assumption that of course I would agree, that the one thing I had spent my life protecting was theirs for the taking. I told him I'd think about it. He seemed satisfied with that and ended the call quickly, as if the matter were settled. I didn't move from the kitchen table for a long time. My eyes drifted to the wall where decades of photographs told the story of our lives. Michael at 5, clutching a bright red fire truck, grinning like the world was nothing but possibility. Michael at 18, in his graduation gown, one arm slung around my shoulders. Michael in his first suit, beaming after landing his first real job. And now, the same boy, grown into a man, asking me to risk the roof over my head for his convenience. We never mentioned it again. But from that night forward, my eyes were sharper, my ears tuned to every word, every glance, every shift in tone. Then came the wedding day. I hadn't received an official invitation, no embossed envelope, no RSVP card. Just a casual, tossed off, "Of course you'll be there," from Michael months ago. Still, I pressed my best dress, wrapped my gift in gold paper, and drove to the hotel where the ceremony would take place. The lobby buzzed with guests in suits and gowns, voices echoing against polished marble. I spotted Michael before he saw me, tall, handsome, every inch the picture of a groom. But when his eyes landed on me, something in his expression tightened, as if an invisible drawstring had been pulled. "Mom," he said, stepping forward in his tuxedo, voice low but firm. "I'm sorry. Shannon thinks it's best if today is just for close friends and family." I blinked, the words landing with a dull thud. "Close friends and family," I repeated. His gaze didn't waver, but his tone softened as if to cushion the blow. "It'll just be easier this way." And over his shoulder, I saw her. Shannon, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm, her eyes locked on mine. There was no pity there, no malice even. Just a calm, measured satisfaction, the look of someone who had just watched a chess piece slide neatly off the board. Something in me shifted then. Not a break, not a collapse, just a door, quietly and firmly closing. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't ask why. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the gift, a framed photograph of Michael and me from his college graduation, and handed it to the concierge without a word. Then I turned and walked out, the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses spilling from the reception hall behind me. My heels clicked against the marble, each step pulling me further from the celebration, but closer to something else entirely. They thought they'd won, that they had written me out of the story for good. But stories don't belong to the people who think they're in control. They belong to the one holding the pen. And I had just decided to pick mine back up. When I got home from the hotel that night, I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. Crying would have been a release, and I wasn't ready to let anything go. Not the anger, not the betrayal, not the cold, clear focus settling in my chest like a stone at the bottom of a still pond. Instead, I hung my dress back in the closet, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at my kitchen table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you notice only when you're listening for something. My laptop was in its usual place, charger coiled neatly beside it. If Michael and Shannon thought they could cut me out of his life and strip away my security, they were about to learn that I wasn't the naive, overworked mother they remembered. I started small, always start small. Their public social media was a scrapbook of curated happiness, the engagement party at a vineyard, smiling dinners with her family, a weekend trip to Napa where they posed on a balcony with wine glasses. I didn't care about the pictures themselves. I cared about the details. I looked past the center of the frame, scanning for the things they didn't mean to highlight. Wine labels in the background. People tagged in group photos. A stray comment under a post that hinted at more than it meant to. And then one post from Shannon caught my eye. It was from a charity gala, her arm hooked around a sharply dressed man in a tailored navy suit. The caption read, "Future family business deals in the making." She had tagged him, her uncle, apparently the same finance expert Michael had mentioned during the house as collateral conversation. So I Googled him. It took minutes to find his LinkedIn profile, the kind that drops big industry buzzwords without saying much of substance. A few local business write-ups, a photo in the Chamber of Commerce newsletter, a smile too smooth to be accidental. But then came the good part, a court record from 2 years ago. Civil, not criminal, but it was a lawsuit over a failed investment scheme. The case had been dismissed, but the filings were enough to sketch a picture. He played fast and loose with other people's money, always just inside the boundaries of the law, but close enough to scorch the edges. The kind of man who'd know exactly how to strip someone's assets without leaving fingerprints. The next morning, I decided to run a little test. I called Michael and told him I'd been thinking about updating my will. I said I wanted to meet him and Shannon for lunch to discuss future planning. They agreed almost instantly, too instantly. We met at a trendy little bistro downtown, Shannon's suggestion. She arrived in a cream-colored wrap dress, perfectly styled hair, the faint scent of expensive perfume drifting ahead of her. Michael looked tired, but there was an alertness in his eyes, as if this meeting mattered more than he wanted to admit. I kept things light at first. Asked about their honeymoon plans, their new apartment, how work was going. Let them relax into the conversation. Then I slid in the bait. "I've been thinking about selling the rental property," I said casually, cutting into my salad. "And maybe liquidating a few investments, simplifying things." Shannon's eyes lit up so fast it was almost comical. She leaned forward, elbows just shy of the table's edge. "You know, with the right moves, you could double that in just a few years. My uncle could guide you. He's amazing with long-term strategies." I smiled politely. "Maybe. But I'd have to be sure I trust the people involved." Her smile didn't flicker, not an inch, but Michael shifted in his seat. "Mom, you can trust him," he said. "We wouldn't suggest it if we didn't believe it was a good idea." I noted the "we" and tucked it away. Over the next week, I made a few more innocent calls. First, to my bank, just to confirm no unusual inquiries had been made on my accounts. Then to the county clerk's office, to make sure no liens had been filed against my home without my knowledge. And finally, to an old friend who'd been in real estate for decades. I asked her, hypothetically, what kind of person buys multiple properties, flips them quickly, and yet somehow always comes out ahead even when the market dips? Her answer? Someone who's playing a different game than everyone else. And not always a clean one. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Shannon's uncle had been involved, quietly, never as the named owner, in several property flips that failed spectacularly. Investors lost money, sometimes everything, and yet his name never appeared on the bankruptcy filings or the loss statements. He was a ghost at the scene of every fire. Then came the break I didn't expect. One evening, my phone rang. It was Claire from church. She hesitated before speaking, her voice carrying the weight of someone about to step into something messy. "I don't know if I should tell you this," she began, "but I overheard Shannon at the salon yesterday. She was talking to one of her friends, laughing, and she said Michael was going to get the house one way or another." I thanked her, kept my voice steady, and hung up. Then I sat back in my armchair and let the words replay in my head. One way or another. There was no ambiguity in that. It wasn't about helping Michael start a married life. It was about acquisition, about taking. I glanced at the bookshelf, at the framed photo of Michael as a boy on his first day of kindergarten, wearing a backpack too big for his little shoulders. My son, my only child, the person I'd sacrificed every ounce of my strength for. And now, he was plotting with the woman he loved to take the very thing I had built to protect him. I could have wept. I could have let the grief drown me. But hurt, I've learned, can be a powerful fuel. I poured myself another cup of tea instead. From that night on, every word I spoke to Michael or Shannon was chosen carefully. Every meeting, no matter how small, was an opportunity to collect another fragment of the truth. I took mental snapshots. The way Shannon's voice tightened when money came up. The way Michael avoided looking at me when I asked direct questions. The way her uncle's name kept sliding into conversations like a shadow slipping under a door. They thought they were building a plan brick by brick. What they didn't realize was that I'd already started dismantling it, one piece at a time. And by the time they noticed, there wouldn't be anything left to stand on. The trick to gathering evidence without raising suspicion isn't about being invisible. It's about being welcomed. If you can make the other person believe you're already halfway on their side, they'll hand you more than you'd ever get by force. So I played my part. I laughed at their stories. I nodded in agreement when Shannon bragged about her sharp business instincts, even when every instinct she described sounded like a shortcut with a moral cost. I let her think her flattery was landing, that when she said, "You're so savvy for your age," or "You've got such a modern way of thinking about money," I was soaking it in like sunlight. At one lunch, I forgot my reading glasses. It was deliberate, of course. Shannon, ever eager to show off her knowledge, slid her chair closer, her perfume sweet and cloying, and began guiding me through a mock investment proposal from her uncle. She explained terms like she was speaking to a slow student, her manicured finger tracing bullet points and projected returns. What she didn't notice was that every time she excused herself to take a call or check her makeup, I tilted the pages toward my phone and snapped quick, clean photos. The documents were so detailed, they practically read like a confession. Risky flips, shell companies, creative tax positioning that reeked of evasion. She didn't guard them because she thought I was already hooked. Next, I went for the source. I set up a casual meeting with her uncle, using the pretense that I wanted advice about selling my rental property. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, my choice. I picked a corner table where the hum of conversation was low and the acoustics worked in my favor. My phone sat deep in my purse, recording the entire exchange. All I had to do was ask broad, innocent questions and let him talk himself into trouble. And he did. He spoke about past opportunities that had gone sideways, blaming partners, market conditions, bad luck. But the subtext was clear. He always walked away clean. He bragged about ways to move property without leaving a paper trail, about greasing wheels to fast-track approvals through the right contacts, and about how keeping things in the family made deals safer. If he thought I was naive, he was wrong, but I let him think it anyway. That night, I went deeper. I ordered my full credit report, something I hadn't bothered with in years. And there it was. Buried among the usual lines was a fresh credit inquiry from a lender I'd never heard of, dated just days after my first conversation with Michael about using my house as collateral. My stomach turned cold. I called the lender the next morning, pretending to be a confused applicant. The customer service clerk, a kind woman with a tired voice, looked up my file. She hesitated, then said, "It looks like an application was started in your name, using your address and a part of your social security number, but it wasn't completed." When I asked who had initiated it, she dropped her voice and said, "It lists a secondary contact, Michael." That was my smoking gun, but I wasn't about to stop there. I called an old friend in the district attorney's office. I didn't give names, not yet. I described the situation in general terms. She listened in silence, then said, "Legally, nothing's happened yet, but everything you're describing points to a coordinated attempt at property fraud. If you can document it, I can put it in front of the right people." So I documented. For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was the obliging, maybe a little too trusting mother who could be steered. In the other, I was building a file that could burn their little empire to the ground. By the end, my collection included screenshots of text messages from Shannon hinting about future plans for my property, phrased just vaguely enough to sound harmless, unless you knew the rest. Copies of the mock investment proposal with terms so questionable they practically glowed red. The full audio recording of her uncle, complete with him chuckling about dodging paperwork. A signed note from the lender confirming the unauthorized application in my name. Statements from 2 acquaintances, one from church, one from the salon, who overheard Shannon boasting that Michael stood to inherit sooner rather than later. I kept everything neatly organized in a locked folder on my laptop, with a duplicate backup drive tucked inside a false bottom drawer in my bedroom dresser. Meanwhile, I kept up the charade. I sent Shannon articles about maximizing property value, as if I were genuinely researching her suggestions. I told Michael I was warming to the idea of letting them help manage my assets after the wedding. I even floated the suggestion, maybe we should get all this in writing after your honeymoon. Shannon's eyes lit up at that. She thought she'd won. Then one night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Shannon. Once the property paperwork is signed, we can move quickly. Michael and I can handle the rest. There it was. She'd just admitted the plan, in writing, no code, no euphemisms, just a straight shot to the truth. I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, staring at the glowing screen. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a deep, steady satisfaction. The net was closed. The evidence was airtight. And now, the only thing left was to choose how and where to reveal it. Because I wasn't going to hand it over quietly. If they wanted a stage, I was going to give them one. Once I had the evidence, it would have been so easy to fire it off in a fit of rage. A few phone calls, a forwarded email, a quick, clean shot to the heart. But that's the thing about quick revenge. It's sloppy. People can claim misunderstandings, misquotes, or misinterpretations. I wanted no such escape hatch. I wanted my strike to be clean, undeniable, and something they would remember every time they stepped into a family gathering for the rest of their lives. The first step was timing, and fate handed me the perfect stage. 2 weeks after they returned from their honeymoon, Shannon and Michael sent out invitations for a family dinner at the local country club. It was clear what the evening was meant to be, their chance to show off their new life, their marriage, their success, to both her side of the family and mine. A room full of relatives, a little too much wine, polite conversation bubbling over white tablecloths, the ideal backdrop for what I had planned. Then came the presentation. I didn't want to just say what they'd tried to do. Words could be twisted, doubted, or dismissed. I wanted them to see it, piece by piece, until denial was impossible. So I made a slideshow. It started harmlessly. Snapshots of Michael as a toddler in the yard, his gap-toothed smile on the first day of school, the two of us planting tomatoes in the garden, his graduation photos. It was nostalgia bait, a warm, safe path for everyone in the room to walk down together. But slide by slide, that path shifted. Screenshots of Shannon's text messages appeared, her words hinting at future plans for my house. Scans of the fraudulent loan application came next, the dates and my stolen information highlighted in yellow. Then the clincher, a crisp audio clip of her uncle's voice, calmly explaining how family connections could move property without leaving a paper trail. Under each image, I added short captions, factual, unemotional, time-stamped. Unauthorized credit inquiry in my name, date. Verbal admission of intent to obtain property without owner's consent. If anyone wanted to accuse me of misrepresenting the situation, they'd have to argue with the evidence itself. For security, I loaded the slideshow onto a password-protected USB drive. Then I handed a duplicate copy to my friend at the DA's office, with instructions. If anything happened to me or the file, she was to forward it directly to the appropriate investigators. I also rehearsed in my head, not a full speech, but a framework. A steady, unshakable sequence of truths, what they'd tried to do, how I found out, and why I was presenting it here in front of everyone who mattered. My goal wasn't drama for its own sake, it was containment. Once the truth was public and undeniable, there would be no private spin, No whispered, "She's exaggerating," behind closed doors. The hardest part was the waiting. In the days leading up to the dinner, Michael called, his tone falsely warm. He reminded me about the date and added, "Shannon really wants us to move past any awkwardness from the wedding." I told him I was looking forward to it. I even offered to bring dessert. The day of the dinner, I dressed with quiet intention. Nothing flashy, but precise. Dark slacks, a cream blouse, a simple gold chain, clothes that made me feel grounded and steady. In my bag, alongside the USB, were printed copies of the most damning evidence, in case anyone tried to claim the slides were fake. The country club was exactly as I'd pictured it. Warm lighting, glassware chiming against plates, the murmur of polite conversation. The air smelled faintly of roasted garlic and wine. Shannon wore a pale blue dress that matched the icy shade of her eyes. Michael a perfectly tailored suit. They floated between tables, touching shoulders, leaning in to laugh, every move calculated to project control. Perfect. Dinner passed with practiced pleasantries. I smiled, answered questions, let my wine sit untouched. I could feel the weight of the USB in my bag, like a stone I was about to skip across the stillest pond imaginable. Then, as dessert plates were being cleared, Shannon rose and tapped her glass. "Before we wrap up," she began, her voice smooth, "Michael and I just wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate our marriage and the start of our new life together." She turned toward me with a smile sweet enough to rot teeth. "And to my mother-in-law, thank you for your generosity and support. We can't wait to make you proud." That was my cue. I stood slowly, smiling as though I were about to return her toast. "I'm glad you said that, Shannon," I began, my voice calm and clear. "Because I do have something to share tonight. Something important for the whole family to see." The room shifted. The low hum of conversation silenced, silverware stilled. Michael's brows furrowed, but he stayed quiet. Shannon's smile flickered, the first small crack. I walked to the projector at the far end of the room. My hands didn't shake as I pulled the USB from my bag and plugged it in. The password screen appeared. I typed it without hesitation. The first slide lit up the wall. Michael at 5 years old, cheeks sticky with melted chocolate, grinning at the camera. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Someone near the back said softly, "Oh, how cute." Shannon glanced at Michael, her smile returning, as if expecting a sentimental tribute, and then the next slide appeared. The laughter died almost instantly as the second slide appeared. A screenshot of a late-night text from Shannon filled the screen in stark black and white. "Once the property paperwork is signed, we can move quickly. Michael and I can handle the rest." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Shannon's smile froze mid-curve. Her eyes snapped to Michael, searching for an anchor that wasn't there. I kept my voice even, letting the weight of the words do the work. This was sent to me just weeks before the wedding. No context, no explanation, just this. Click. The next slide glowed onto the wall, a scanned document from a lender, my address and partial social security number printed neatly across the top, the date clearly visible. "This," I said, my tone steady, "is the unauthorized loan application that appeared on my credit report. I never signed it. I never even knew it existed until I checked for myself." The room was silent except for the faint mechanical hum of the projector. Wine glasses hung halfway to lips. Forks paused midair. Click. Now an audio waveform pulsed across the screen. A moment later, Shannon's uncle's voice rolled out of the speakers, confident and casual. With the right setup, we can transfer ownership without too much paperwork. Family makes it easier. A sharp gasp came from somewhere near the back. The sound echoed in the stillness. I let the pause stretch, then turned toward the room. For months, I believed I was welcome in my son's new life. Instead, what I faced was a deliberate, coordinated attempt to take the home I've lived in for 35 years. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Every syllable landed heavy, rippling outward. That was when Shannon shot to her feet. "This is twisted. You're trying to make it sound like..." Click. The final slide appeared before she could finish. A printed email chain, her name in the sender's line. Her words spelled out in black and white. Contingency plans if she resists. Her voice caught in her throat. The color drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Michael's head dropped. His shoulders sagged forward. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. "I have copies of all of this," I said, my gaze sweeping the room. "Every message, every document, every recording. They've already been shared with the district attorney's office. Tonight isn't about legal action. Not yet. Tonight is about truth, about making sure no one here is fooled about who you've welcomed into this family." For a long beat, no one moved. The air felt thick, heavy with the kind of quiet that follows an earthquake. Cousins leaned toward one another, whispering. Shannon's aunt shook her head slowly, her lips pressed thin. Across the table, one of Michael's oldest friends muttered under his breath, "Man, what did you do?" Shannon's hand trembled as she grabbed her purse. She muttered something sharp at Michael, her voice low but venomous. He hesitated, still staring at the floor, before finally following her toward the door. Just before stepping out, he glanced back at me. There was something in his eyes, shame maybe, or fear. I couldn't tell which. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let the doors swing shut behind them. The silence held. And then, from somewhere near the middle of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was tentative at first, almost questioning. Then another pair joined in, and another, until the sound swelled, filling the room like a tide coming in, a quiet, uncoordinated kind of applause, the kind you give when you're not entirely sure what else to do. I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't the end. But the first blow had landed, clean and sharp, exactly where it needed to. 2 days after the dinner, my friend at the DA's office called. Her voice was calm, but the words were exactly what I'd been waiting for. "With what you gave us," she said, "we can open a preliminary investigation into attempted property fraud." I didn't need to ask for details. I already knew what that meant. That night, Michael's number lit up my phone for the first time since everything unraveled. It was late, the kind of late where you only call if you've been drinking or if you've finally run out of ways to sleep. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, voice low and unsteady. "Mom, I didn't know it would go that far. I'm sorry." But sorry doesn't erase text messages. It doesn't undo forged applications or whispered schemes shared over dinner. By the end of the week, the ripples had spread. Shannon's once busy social media feeds went silent. Her uncle's investment firm website vanished overnight. Word through the family grapevine was that a few of his other clients had started asking the kind of questions that keep a man up at night. Even the country club, her favorite stage, wasn't immune. Staff began referring to that dinner in the kind of hushed tones usually reserved for scandals with teeth. Memberships are hard to revoke, but reputations? Those can die in a day. Hers was already halfway buried. Michael moved out of their apartment less than a month later. Whether he left or was pushed, I didn't bother to find out. I heard, through a cousin, that Shannon had filed for an annulment citing irreconcilable differences. The irony almost made me laugh. As for my house, I changed the locks, updated the title paperwork, shifted a portion of my assets into a trust, one with terms so airtight not even blood could pry it open. I rewrote my will, line by line, leaving nothing to chance. The best part? I never raised my voice, never made a scene, never had to threaten or beg. The truth did all the work for me, slow, sharp, and irreversible. A neighbor told me she saw Shannon in the grocery store parking lot, pacing with her phone pressed tight to her ear, her voice trembling. She ruined everything, she said. She was wrong. I hadn't ruined anything. I'd simply refused to let them take what wasn't theirs. Now, when I walk past my garden, the same one Michael once helped me tend, back when his hands were still clean, I don't think about revenge. I think about roots, about the things worth protecting, and about how it feels to stand your ground and keep it. Some nights the questions still drift in, quiet, uninvited. What if I'd brushed off the warning signs? What if I'd signed those papers, thinking it was just temporary? What if I'd taken their smiles at face value? But then I remember the moment the projector lit up that country club wall. The instant Shannon's perfect composure cracked, her eyes wide and searching for an exit. I remember the way Michael's shoulders collapsed inward, as if he'd suddenly realized there was no one left to shield him from the truth. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't always wear a judge's robe or bang a gavel. Sometimes it's quieter, sharper. Sometimes it's the slow burn of humiliation, the sting of having every mask you've ever worn ripped off in front of the people whose approval you've craved the most. I don't waste my days on them anymore. My home is still mine. My finances are untouchable. My peace is intact. And if they ever think about running the same game on someone else, well, I've already made sure the right people know where to look and what to watch for. Their names won't slip quietly into another victim's life without setting off alarms. Because real revenge isn't about rage. It isn't even about getting even. It's about control. It's about taking back every inch they tried to steal and making sure they know, in their bones, that they'll never get it back. That projector didn't just expose their plan. It burned it into the memory of everyone in that room. And memories, unlike paperwork, can't be erased. So no, I don't wonder if they remember. I know they do. And that's exactly the point. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. More real-life revenge stories are coming soon.